So today I am driving south towards Miami. I'm about 100 miles north now of Miami. I just passed Port St. Lucie, I think was the turnoff that I just passed. So I had a couple things that I wanted to talk about today. First of all, yesterday I saw that there was a study that came out of the University of Dresden in Germany that looked at students in school that had not closed down there in that area. It's actually an area of Germany that's had pretty low occurrence of the coronavirus. And so the researchers took blood samples from just over 2,000 individuals, about 1,500 students, about 500 teachers and administrators, and then submitted that to antibody testing in order to try to establish among that general population what the percent positive was. So the percent positive that they ended up coming up with out of those 2,000, if I remember correctly, the specific number, it was 12 positive tests out of the 2,045 samples. So that's 0.6% positive. So the conclusions that they arrived at, and it's interesting because I haven't been able to find the output of the study in English. I've only been able to find it in German, but all the news outlets are reporting on it. So I read through it in German, and my German's so-so. But what I was able to understand from it is that effectively he's trying to say, or the head researcher is trying to say, that sending kids to school is not really that risky, that they don't appear to be a vector. And the reason why he concluded that is because even though some of the students who were in the study had members of their household that had tested positive, they then had not contracted nor passed that along. So his conclusion is that it's quite possible that, adolescents in this case, because they were like middle school and high school student age is who these kids were, that the adolescents may actually be a halt against contagion rather than a help to push the contagion through. So it's an interesting result. I'm not entirely convinced by this study, partly because I can't read it in English, which is really annoying, but also because I did a quick check on what the percent positive among the population is currently in that same area. Now this isn't cases tested, but just simply you take the population versus cases reported in that same area of Germany, and it's about a quarter of that positivity rate, right? So it's 0.015 or something like that percent of the population that shows positive so far. So less than or just over 0.1% of the population. So I'm not real sure that I'm convinced by his study, but I'm going to keep looking because opening of schools is a pretty important topic. And then the second thing is that there was also in the news yesterday a big hullabaloo about finding out that 300 or so labs in Florida had reported 100% of their tests as positive. So, which, on the face of it, that sounds pretty bad. That sounds like fudged figures or cheating, essentially, on the reporting. Well, I dug into that a little bit and came to find that it's bad, but it's not as bad as what it sounds like in the hysterical reporting in the news media. So apparently there's a distinction between public labs and private labs in the state of Florida. And it turns out that these 300 labs in question are private labs, and the private labs had only been reporting positive cases. So in other words, they were doing a lot more tests and they were getting negatives, but they were only reporting the positives to the health department. So therefore 100% of the tests that they reported were positive. So it doesn't make a difference then in the total number of positive test cases. That number is still accurate, but it would make a difference in the percent positive tested data, because it's going to skew the percent positive tested up. And the problem with that is, in other discussions, I've said that, well, if you're increasing testing, you'll see increasing cases. But as long as your increasing testing also is showing increasing percent positive, then that means that, the virus is actually spreading among the population. It's not just because you're testing more. Well, now the data skewed in Florida. The percent positive has been going up artificially because these labs have been reporting only positives and getting 100% positive reporting. So that's an issue. So it'll be interesting to see if we find that with any other states. But we know, at least in Florida, that the percent positive tested number is skewed. Then the third thing is that I found out kind of some cool news today. Turns out that my company is coming out with a new version of an established test on a platform that I actually am headed to Miami to do some work on right now, which is kind of cool. So it's an antibody test, and what they're doing is they're adding the capability to detect the antibodies against COVID in order to find out for potential transplant recipients, as well as donors. Well, not donors. Yeah, I guess it could apply to donors in some cases, but effectively to find out whether or not they have had COVID-19. So it's kind of cool. It's a high throughput testing platform, so it'll be able to give lots of results quite rapidly. And effectively what it does is take the serum from the patient's blood that's to be analyzed, and it introduces to the serum some microspheres. They're like tiny little plastic spheres that have been coated with the antigen that corresponds to the antibody that you're looking for. And if you think of antigen and antibody, it's kind of like a key and a lock, right? So a certain key fits a certain lock. It's kind of the same thing with antibodies. Antibodies are keyed into a certain antigen. So the antibodies that are keyed into COVID, if they're coated onto this tiny little microsphere, and there's hundreds of thousands of the microspheres in the test run, then you can get an attachment, and then you can detect the attachment through fluorescence. In this case, by passing the beads through a tiny little glass cuvette that will allow them to flow like one bead at a time going through inside a laminar flow of fluid. And as they pass through, they hit a couple of lasers, and the lasers lights them up, and then detectors can tell what color of 100 different colors that bead is, and whether or not it fluoresced positive for a certain thing. So it's pretty cool that they've come out with that. It's pretty responsive considering my experience with these things, and it is for research use only that they're coming out with it, but they're working towards some registrations and FDA approval, etc., which will come as we get more data. So that's it from me today. Thanks very much for watching. As always, stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask in public places, tell your friends and loved ones to do the same. We can get through this together. Thanks.